Uncovering Your Voice. Hi, I'm Colette.
And I'm Carol Ann.
And I'm Bonnie.
This is a place where we hear each other's stories. And today I want to introduce Bonnie to you and her story that she'd like to share with you today.
Today I'd like to share my story of divorce. I'm going to go back in years because it's been many years since I was divorced from my first husband. But I wanted to share it today because during that time I became a very bitter woman. And so I wanted to tell my story about that. I married my childhood sweetheart, and we knew each other from a very long time, but it even goes back further than that. My mother and his mother were best friends since grade 7. They grew up together thinking, well, when we get married and have kids, wouldn't it be cool if our kids married? And that is in fact what happened. And so our ties between us were very strong. We knew everybody in the family for many years, his grandparents, his cousins, his aunts, his uncles. So that bond was so tight. And so when we experienced difficulty and the marriage failed, it was not an easy break. It was about 7 years into our marriage that we started to have difficulties. And the marriage, in that time, I suggested counseling. And so he agreed, and we went to counseling together. And then the counselor wanted to see us separate. He went and did his part, but I didn't go to mine. I thought all the problems stemmed from him and that I didn't need to go. That was a big mistake on my part. But we muddled on. And we did what many couples do during times of difficulty. Instead of looking inward and trying to fix the problems between us, we looked outward and we looked for distractions. Some people will have another baby. We, in fact, tried that. We had a 3-year-old and we tried to have a second, but it didn't happen. Other people might take some grand exotic vacation, or they might, delve into their work and lead separate lives. For us, we bought a farm, a hobby farm. And so we poured ourselves into that, and we did everything we could to renovate and to make that home special. My husband bought a tractor and we tried plowing, and so we put all our effort into that. And that meant the marriage went on for a couple years, but it didn't solve any of our problems. I remember very clearly the March evening that he sat me down and he told me that he wanted a divorce. It, to me, came out of nowhere. He told me he had been secretly seeing a counselor for several months, and the counselor had advised him to leave me. I did not react well. I, at first, was so numb, I didn't know what to say. I actually took off and ran that night, stayed several hours out of the house and came back. I didn't know how to react. And instead of asking questions and seeking answers and being curious about what led to this, I instead closed up. Then I became angry and I lashed out, and no amount of talking was able to occur because I was just unresponsive. So that led to more and more anger, more and more resentment, things building up between us until he left the home, and we eventually divorced. People think that when that happens, it's a clear break and you go on with your life, but it's not always that simple. And in our case, it wasn't. And so because of all that heritage between our families, the break was not simple. And we had a little boy who was affected by that as well.
How can parents help their children when going through a divorce?
You know, the big adage is children are resilient. And that is true, but children are deeply affected by divorce. Um, it can be, you know, in different ways and different degrees depending on the situation. But I know because I'm a child of divorce. My parents divorced when I was 18, 17, 18. And even at that age, I was deeply affected and didn't realize to the extent that I was affected until many, many years later in my own life. For children, the main thing that they need to know, the number one thing they need to know, is they are first loved by both parents. Whoever left or didn't leave, it doesn't matter. They need to know that they are loved, first of all. Second of all, they need to know that they're safe. They need to know where they're living, that they'll be fed, that their friends will be still in their lives, that they will go to the school that they love. They need that routine. They need those comforts around them. So they need safety. Number three, they need to know that they are not the cause of the divorce. That between mommy and daddy, it's an adult concern, and they are not the result of the divorce. It's not something they did, or it's not something they didn't do. They are not the cause of the divorce. Next, they need to be able to talk about what's happening to them. Often they feel they can't talk to mommy about daddy or daddy about mommy, but they need somewhere to be able to speak without judgment, without fear. And so sometimes you need to involve a counselor or a trusted friend, even a grandparent that they can talk to, but they need an outlet. Next, they need access to both parents. Sometimes through the ugliness of divorce, we want to use our children as a pawn. And that is wrong. They need access unless there's abuse or a situation such as harm may come to the child. They need to have access to both mommy and daddy, or daddy and daddy, or mommy and mommy, whatever the case can be. And lastly, there should be no trash talk in front of your child for the other partner. They should not be hearing from you as you talk on the phone to your friend about your ex. Keep that out of their ears. Those are the things that I've noticed are really important. And just a warning to people who are talking to the children of divorce after we separated, people who were not thinking of this being a negative in any way would say things like this to my son: now you're the man of the house, so take care of your mom. You don't realize that even at that young age, they don't have the capacity to understand that. And as a little boy of 6 or 7, my son took that to heart. And it put a lot of pressure on him, a lot of anxiety on him. I remember the day where it came out and I finally learned what he was carrying. And we had an argument. He was out of control. He was just showing so much stress and anxiety. And finally I held him and I said, "What is wrong?" And he said, "I can't do it anymore. I can't do it anymore." I said, "What can't you do?" He says, "I can't take care of you, mommy." And I found out that he had been carrying that for months, that he had to be the daddy of the house. He had to look after me, and he just couldn't. So be very careful what you say to children in that very strenuous, very tender times of a new divorce.
Bonnie, that's really touched me in a deep spot. And I thank you for sharing and going deep, because it's touched deep places in me. And I'm hearing me too in my head of being a child of divorced parents and also being a divorced person myself. So thank you for opening your heart. Are you willing to continue to go deeper into your story with us?
Yes, I am. Yes. So, as I said, the farm was sold and we divorced. and I bought a house, and my son and I lived in, I shared custody. And for a while, I hung on to my faith. I, read scriptures, I prayed, I had other people praying. I believed for the marriage to come back together. And it didn't happen. And I held on to the offenses and the anger. And I chose not to forgive. I thought by holding on to that unforgiveness that I was getting back. I was getting even with my ex. And so I stopped reading my Bible. I stopped praying. I went to church, but only to take my son. And I was the last one there and the first one to leave because I didn't want to interact with anybody. And so over time, with refusing to forgive and choosing to hold on to the resentments and the anger, I became very bitter. Bitterness it's like, it seeps into every area of your life. It's sneaky. It's under the surface. You don't even really realize it's there, but you know that you've changed, and others know that you changed. And that's where I went into a deep, deep hole of bitterness.
Is there any warning signs that somebody could look out for or watch, kind of like, road construction ahead or pothole ahead, or just to, denial is very strong. When we're walking in it, we're not really truly awake to the situation. Is there any warning posts that we can look for when going through this? If we have, unforgiveness or bitterness in us?
Yes, as I've looked back over this now, I've identified, in fact, 14 ways that I found I was bitter. So you can use these as kind of a signpost for yourself. If you have all 14, then it's probably you are a bitter person. If you have just a few, you might just want to use it as kind of a signal that you're heading that way. But the first thing I would say is you harbor these offenses and you replay them over and over and over again in your mind. You wake up with them, you go through your day with them, and you go to sleep with them. So if you are replaying these offenses, what he said, what he didn't say, what I said, what I didn't say, over and over again, over many weeks, months, and some people even years, then you know that there's a case of bitterness resulting in there. Second thing is, some other signs is you might be physically sick. I got extreme migraines and insomnia where I couldn't sleep at night, mostly because I was thinking of all these replays. But look at physical signs, what has changed in your life. Another thing is you start to make poor decisions. Some people dive into areas of life that they've never done before. Oh, I would never do that. Well, they start to do those things. For me, I tried alcohol, and I had never drank alcohol ever in my life. But I started to, you might do things that you never expected, or you might make just poor decisions, extra risk taking. Fourthly, you will think of yourself as superior by pointing out all the faults in the other person's life. You get a kind of self-righteousness about it. Next, you spread bitterness by slandering the person to everybody that you meet. You start talking about them, gossiping about them, and it's always negative, and you spread it to others. Next, you get an appetite for spying on the person. So nowadays, you might, troll on the internet for them on Facebook, Instagram, Back then, when I was divorced, we didn't have any of that. So I would spy out by looking at, and finding out where he was living and driving by, maybe making a phone call or talking to people who knew him, finding out what was he doing at work. You have this insatiable hunger to find out about the person. It's not because you have good concerns, it's because of bad things. But in fact, when you do that, you're reliving and putting yourself in that situation over and over again. I remember the first time I found out where he lived, and I drove by the house and I saw Christmas lights on. It was November, and there's Christmas lights on his house. And I was so upset because he would never put Christmas lights up on my house. Now, who knows if those were on the house when he bought it or someone else put them up? It doesn't matter. But that's how you relive. And it's almost like picking a scab again when you do things like this and find out things about their lives. It's not healthy. Next, fantasizing revenge or ill will against them. Having resentment for finding out anything good that's happened in their life, because you really truly do not want anything good to happen to them. An anger or fear when you hear their name, even if it's not them, or see a person that looks or has the same stature of them. I recall one time going to a party several years ago when I had remarried, and my new husband and I met this gentleman, and we introduced ourselves and said our name, and he found out my name was Bonnie, and he said, "Can I call you something else?" I was kind of taken back and asked, "Well, why?" Well, his ex-wife from several years ago, her name was Bonnie. He could not even speak the name of Bonnie because it brought up so many things to him. And this was years later after he had divorced. That's a sign of bitterness. When your unforgiveness becomes a badge, it's almost like, look at me. It becomes your identity, and you feel that you can't even give it up because what would you be without it? That's a sign of bitterness. I've mentioned this already, but you do tend to alienate yourself from others. I remember a friend talking to another friend about me and saying, "How's Bonnie doing?" She said, "Well, why don't you ask her for yourself?" She said, she's not approachable. It's like she's a porcupine with all these quills coming at her saying, "Back off and stay away from me." And that's the kind of persona that you give out to others that are perceptive. When you're bitter, if you have a spiritual life, you will stop praying, stop meditating, stop reading the word, maybe stop going to functions like church. Again, you're closing off and becoming isolated from all of the helps or support systems that you had. We will make overgeneralizations or inner vows, such as, "I'll never marry again," or "all men are liars," or "all women are manipulators," or whatever the generalization is. But you start to make these blanket statements about all people of that gender. And lastly, if you're bitter, you stop enjoying life. It's like you have a dark cloud following you. You withdraw, or you just stop having joy in the areas that you used to have joy in. Maybe you stop your hobbies. Maybe you stop your activities that normally you would do. And those are signs that something's wrong, that something is needing to be fixed in you.
Okay, I admit I got 10 out of 14 on that one. I always wanted to pass tests, just not quite sure I wanted to pass that one. So help me out here, Bonnie. What can I do about the bitterness that's now I'm recognizing had festered? Some are healed, some are not. What can I do about that?
Yes, that's a great question. Now, I need to tell you that I didn't suddenly wake up to all of this and say, I need to heal from bitterness. I didn't recognize it at the time. It's only through self-reflection now that I'm aware of it. But when you become bitter after a divorce, or if you have unforgiveness, anger, the first thing you have to do is realize that divorce is a type of death. When there's a death, you need time to grieve. So, number one, I would say you need a safe place to deal with that grief. So, maybe it's a trusted friend, someone close to you. Maybe it's a support group. That's what I did. I joined a support group called Divorce Care. And after joining it and taking the course a couple times, I actually became the facilitator and ran it for many years. For just as a side, there is a divorce care group for children as well, divorce care for kids. And we'll put the link below in the video. But you need a safe place. You need support. You need to lament, first of all, the fact that this marriage has died. Next, you need to recognize the truth of situation, what you're feeling, because during divorce, your thoughts get muddled and you may have untrue statements that you're thinking. So you need to challenge those. So I highly recommend seeing a therapist or counselor, a psychotherapist, and having cognitive behavior therapy, which helps you to challenge the lies that you hear in your head. I recognized that I had unforgiveness in me and I needed to forgive. That is not an easy thing to do. Forgiveness is a process, and forgiveness is going to take time. But if it is allowed to be in you unchallenged, that's what leads to bitterness. It's important that you forgive the person who has, in your mind, harmed you or left you in the divorce. It starts one thing at a time, one issue at a time. It could be through offering it in person. I forgive you. Often cases it's not. It may be writing down a letter and then burning that letter. It may be telling it to an accountability partner and then having that accountability partner standing in for the person that has harmed you. But it's little by little, incident by incident. When it comes up in the day, you say, I forgive you in your head or out loud, if it's possible. I forgive you. It may happen once or twice a day. It may happen several times a day, but every time you make a choice to forgive. Now, I was not ready to forgive when I first heard that I had to forgive, because if you're a follower of Jesus, it's a command that you forgive. I thought holding on to it was my only answer, but realized that I had to forgive. So what I did was, my first prayer was, Lord, make me willing to be willing to forgive. It sounds crazy, but it was a first step. So you take the first step. I choose to forgive. Maybe that you go by your favorite restaurant that you used to go to and something wells up inside of you. I choose to forgive. Maybe you're talking to someone who has the same name as your ex and it brings up something. I choose to forgive. So for every little instance, you choose to forgive. And for me, as a follower of Jesus, I choose to forgive in Jesus' name. I choose to allow Jesus then to heal that hurt, allow him to work in both our lives, because you're releasing that other person so that they can be worked on as well.
While you were sharing, Bonnie, I just had a question. And I thought, if I'm in bitterness, I'm probably enjoying it. So as a follower of Jesus' teachings, why do you think he commands you to forgive?
Yes, when you are in bitterness, you really do like that. Again, it's that badge. It becomes your identity. But if you read in God's word, and I'll just refer to it right here. In Matthew 6:15, it says, "But if you do not forgive others their sins, your Father in heaven will not forgive yours." That's pretty bold. That's pretty clear. If I don't forgive, then God cannot forgive me. Another one says, Mark 11:25 says, "And when you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive them, so that your Father in heaven may also forgive your sins." So it's pretty clear that we need to forgive. And it was interesting, Peter went to Jesus and he asked Jesus, "How many times do I forgive my brother or sister who has sinned against me?" And Peter offered up to 7 times, thinking that he was giving an exorbitant amount of times to forgive someone. And in fact, Jesus says, "I tell you not 7 times, but 77 times." And what Jesus was saying, I believe, is it doesn't matter how many times our command is to forgive. And God didn't do this to punish us. He didn't do this because he knew we couldn't do it. He did this because he knew that through forgiveness we're set free. That's the most incredible thing. We think that, holding on to it is the answer, when in fact we need to be set free by forgiving the person who's offended us. It's so incredible. And when you do choose to do that, then he can work on releasing you from the bitterness and the anger and the resentment.
Bonnie, I must admit that I walked in unforgiveness because I had a misunderstanding of what that was. Because I felt like if I forgave the person, it meant that it didn't matter or the damage wasn't done to me. And I hung on to that, thinking that was like a protection for me, that, I mattered. But then I came into a deeper understanding of what forgiveness is and was. Do you have any definitions or understanding through divorce care what forgiveness is?
Yes, in fact, I will start with what it isn't. So some myths about forgiveness. So number one, we think that if we forgive, it means I'm saying I wasn't hurt or that the offense didn't matter. That is untrue. Number two, if I forgive, it means that what the other person did wasn't wrong. Number three, if I forgive, it means I have to suddenly trust the other person. If I forgive, it means I'm letting the other person off the hook. And that's so common that, if I forgive them, then it means it didn't happen or it's not important. That is a myth. If I forgive, it means that the other person is going to say they're sorry. That rarely happens. And lastly, if I forgive once, then it's over. That's also not true. So let's look at what forgiveness is. So forgiveness is, first of all, a decision. It's not a feeling. It's a decision for me as a Christian because it's a command. So start there. That was the first thing. It's necessary for your health, your happiness. There's a saying that says, unforgiveness is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. But then in fact, unforgiveness is the poison, and it's not harming them, it's harming you. So it's necessary for your good health, and you need to forgive so that you're healthy and can go on. So that leads me to, it is necessary to go on. If you want to remarry, if you want to have healthy relationships, you need to forgive. Here's another quote: "To forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that the prisoner was yourself." So you think you're letting the other person off the hook when in fact you're letting yourself out of that prison. Unforgiveness can feel like bondage. Bitterness feels like a bondage. And it's not affecting the other person in any way. They don't know. They don't care. They don't even have any idea what you're going through. So set that prisoner free. That's you. Forgiveness means that you may have a working relationship with that person. You may have reconciliation, but that doesn't mean that you're going to get back together. Doesn't mean that you have to be best friends. It means that you're just releasing the pain, releasing the anger, releasing the bitterness so God can work in both of your lives. It's necessary to enter new relationships. Without the healing of forgiveness, you actually will carry that baggage into the next relationship. Healing comes through forgiveness.
And how can you know that you have received the healing?
A number of ways that you can tell if you have truly healed from unforgiveness. The first one is you no longer start categorizing yourself as the saint and the other person as the sinner, or you as the victim and the other person as the offender. But instead, you see each other as just being two human beings who need compassion and grace. That would be number one. Number two is you no longer have the need or feel the desire to share with others what you think has been done to you. You're not out there gossiping anymore. You're not out there sharing the nasty details of your divorce. That's behind you. Number three, when you recall or think about that person, you no longer have a physical reaction. I used to get, a sick stomach, or some people get a clenched jaw or clenched fists, or they feel like they're going to be sick, or whatever the reaction. You no longer have any of those reactions. You no longer, see that person everywhere in the stature of other people or in the name of other people. It no longer has any power over you. Next, when you think about situations or recall hurtful situations, they don't draw up any anger or fear or need to lash out. They're just a statement of what happened to you in your life. You no longer have all the emotional and physical pain or reaction that would come with that. Next, you actually get to the point where you can wish good thoughts, or even honestly pray for the person before you might think that that wouldn't be possible. You start to see the good things that might happen. Maybe you never had a chance to have control of your finances before, and now you do. Maybe you have more time for yourself, that you can take up a new hobby or join an exercise group than you never had. You start to look forward to life again. You start to see and have pleasure in your life again that you never had before. So those are signs that a person is forgiven. And sometimes, and this is the way God really showed me and gauged my level of forgiveness, sometimes He can even give you dreams. And God gave me a series of 3 dreams. I can't remember the time period, but it was at least over a year when I was really starting to seek to forgive, and I had already begun the process. I had a dream, and my ex arrived at the door, and I opened the door and he was there, and I slammed the door immediately because he said, "I'm here for supper." And I thought, there's no way I'm letting you into my house. There's no way I would serve you supper. And I slammed the door. In the next dream, The doorbell rang. He came to the door. He opened the door. He said, "I'm here for supper." I allowed him into the entranceway. We spoke briefly and he left. I felt no way could I serve him supper, but it wasn't to the degree that I had the first time. In the last dream, he arrived at the door. "I'm here for supper." I allowed him in. He took his shoes off. I took his coat. He entered the dining room. He sat at my table and I served him supper. And the Lord showed me the degree of forgiveness in my life. And it just showed to me how clearly that it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not a one-time thing. It's a lifetime thing, because we don't just have to forgive ex-husbands or ex-wives. We need to forgive all the time in life. Little offenses, little things in our own relationships with our children, with our spouses, with our friends, with our community. They happen all the time. And we have a choice. We have a choice to lay aside that anger, that grief, that offense, that bitterness, and ask for forgiveness and give forgiveness. We need to model forgiveness to others, and then they will model forgiveness to us, I believe. Be a people that doesn't walk in resentment, that doesn't walk in bitterness and anger. We have too much of that in our world right now. We have become too divided. Instead, we are commanded, if you're a Christian, we are commanded to give forgiveness and to ask for forgiveness, because Jesus forgave all that I have done. He paid his life for us. He went to the cross with all the sins of the world, every sin that every person in all of humanity, in all of the years behind us and in front of us, he took on the cross and bare it so that I could have eternal life. He did that for me. Can't I then in turn forgive others? That's the challenge. That's where I'm at. Forgiveness is a lifestyle.
Any final words?
I believe wholeheartedly in marriage, but I also recognize that divorce and separation are going to happen. So I would first encourage you to reach out. Don't go it alone. Look after your children. Realize that the hurt and the pain you're going through, they're also experiencing. So be there for them. If you can't do that, then reach out and get help for them as well. Number 3, don't let bitterness and anger and resentment build up in you. Find a way to forgive. Step out. Do like I was. Be willing to forgive. Get a starting point there and move forward. There is life after divorce. There is life after bitterness. You can heal. You can be set free. Be hopeful and be kind to one another.
Thank you for sharing your journey and your heart with us today. I must admit, I've seen some signposts on the roads that I have to go back to, and I've been divorced for 30 years. I'm remarried, but didn't realize there was still some stuff that I had to deal with. And I saw so clearly, Bonnie, when you were sharing with us, that unforgiveness is giving our power away too. That if I'm not forgiving another person, I perceive power over me to still hurt me. Whereas when I give them forgiveness, I take back my power to walk under good fruit, if you will. So thank you for sharing with us. I know I've gleaned a lot out of here, and we'll be visiting this back again. So thank you for sharing your journey and your heart with us. If you have any questions or prayer requests, or maybe you even have dreams that you feel are healing dreams, we'd love to hear from you. We can be reached at recoveringyourvoice@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us. Okay, sticky note. Okay, there we go. Happy face. Okay.
So one night, it was a March night. I can remember it very clearly. As I mentioned, if you're a Christian or if you have a prayer life, you stop praying. Okay. Bye-bye.
Let's try it.
Yeah, we're good. It's all good.
Yeah. Tech Bonnie will do her magic on clean up on aisle 4 instead of 5.
No, I
And
think it's
laugh.
okay. Sorry. I was just saying,
Carol Ann,
I'm
Anything?
Carol Ann. I didn't know what you were going with there. No,
No, again, do your magic, honey. Bibbidi bobbidi boo.